What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Bro History. It's Henry Zamota, Danny Abdel-Jabbar. Danny, how do I sound right now?
You sound pretty good, actually, man. How you,
Mic
how you
check,
doing
mic check. Yo, turn my
Check,
headphones
check.
up. Turn my headphones up. Turn my headphones up. Do you know what that's from?
Actually, I have to turn. Yeah, it's isn't that Eminem?
No, it's Chappelle's show.
Oh,
Dylan.
5 greatest rappers alive. Dylan, and Dylan.
The whole song is "Turn my headphones up."
I can't believe I forgot about that.
Dude, Chappelle is on. He's the best stand-up of all time.
Did you watch his new stand-up recently?
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, I liked it.
It's so funny because everyone is saying how controversial it is, but only
there were
like
some cringy parts
only
to it.
people like on Twitter are saying how controversial it is. When I speak to normal people, like just normal people that we associate with every single day, who are more of a consensus of like the American public than some random Twitter people. Everyone loves it. Who I speak to, and everyone's like, it was not that edgy. Like there's some parts that are kind of edgy, but it's not.
There were some parts that were like cringeworthy, but it was like all in the name of comedy. You know, it was all funny.
There was nothing more offensive in Chappelle's latest special than his earlier ones, like the ones that he like killing him softly. So,
Right.
I mean, I just thought it was funny. I don't know what all the stir is. It is funny though because it's like been a pretty successful. It has a huge buzz. Did you see the Rotten Tomatoes scandal? I don't know if you can call it a scandal.
Yeah, I heard about that. That Rotten Tomatoes gave it like a bad review, like a 0 or some stupid shit.
Yeah, so
right?
Rotten Tomatoes gave Chappelle's latest special like a 20% or something. I don't know what the exact number is. I don't even know how they really figure out what the rating is for a new show or a new movie. But the audience score was like 100%. So everyone was talking about how that is just the clear divide between actual people and loser journalist reviewers. So it was just funny, but I didn't really think it was edgy at all. It just was. It made some, I guess, some jokes that some people might be offended by, but I don't know. I don't look too much into it.
Chappelle's kind of an offensive like comedian, but like that's his shtick, you know. Like he says shit to get a rise out of people, you know, and like he crosses boundaries and shit. Like I don't know, but if you go into it thinking, I'm gonna watch this comedy show, I have no idea what this is gonna be about, then maybe you might be a little offended by some of the shit that you go into with. But if you go in knowing that this is Dave Chappelle and he's gonna say some shit, then it's like, I don't know, par for the course, I guess.
I guess the things that I hear people say in private, like when they're with their friends, are way more edgy and offensive. So it just reflects what's actually funny to people. You know, It's not this like filtered version of comedy where you have to like really dance over certain topics or really just repeat talking points on certain issues that are quote unquote sensitive. That doesn't reflect real comedy, and that's why comedians back in the day are so much better than they are now. Like there's a handful of funny comedians now, but when we were growing up, there was a lot of funny comedians. Or maybe
There was one comedian that I remember watching when I was super young, probably way too young to be watching this shit. Do you know Andrew Dice Clay?
Of course, I know Andrew Dice Clay.
Holy shit! I was introduced to Andrew Dice Clay like way too early.
Everyone was listening to him way too early. Dirty nursery rhymes.
Yeah, Hickory Dickory Dock. I'm not gonna finish that
Hickory
one.
Dickory Dock. A chick was sucking my cock. The clock struck.
The clock struck 2.
She picked up. Oh no! She gobbled my goo. I kicked the bitch neck on the next block. Oh.
That guy was such a fucking. I mean,
dude.
Damn, that shit would not fly today for sure.
It's still hilarious, but we were watching that when we were like 9.
Yeah, like children.
8 or 9 years old. But I was also
Totally
listening to
not supposed
Eminem when I was in 3rd grade.
That's true.
So I guess we were just exposed to it. I have zero clue what kids are watching on their iPad, on their freaking iPads nowadays. I just look over. I was with my my girlfriend's family a couple of months ago, and I was like looking at what's on the screen of their iPads, like the little kids' iPads, and it's just explosions. Like it's just like colors and explosions and like just trippy shit and cut comedy, and then PewDiePie's face pops up. I'm just like, whoa, like how do you even digest all that imagery? Like, doesn't that give you a seizure?
I heard that there was like this like scandal on YouTube for like the kids shows, and like the algorithms were like displaying shit that was like totally inappropriate. It'll be like, looks like a kids show, and then halfway through it's like it teaches you how to commit suicide or something.
Dude, I heard about that. It was called Elsa Gate.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was on. Joe Rogan was talking about that a lot. It was like some people figured out ways to like screw with the YouTube recommendations algorithm where they could just put up like a weird ass video of like Spider-Man and Elsa like smearing shit on each other's faces, and that would be put in like the recommended playlist of a children's playlist. So it was just like some weird shit with YouTube, and I guess people learned how to play it. But all right, we are digressing way too much. We have only talked about Chappelle and shit for 7 minutes at this point. But we are talking about scandal, so I guess it's a pretty good opening, right?
Yeah.
So today, I guess we're talking about a topic that's pretty sensitive, to say the least. We wanted to talk about Iran still, but we wanted to throw it back, and we wanted to compare it to a situation that we both lived through. And when I say Iran, I mean just all the fuss and all the craziness that's going on between corporate press / Pentagon / Trump / Bolton, who is now the fired national security advisor, which is quite Michael Bolton. My only regret with the John Bolton thing is that Trump didn't call him like Michael Bolton when he fired him. It'd be so funny.
I don't like this guy, Michael Bolton.
Michael Bolton is fired. If you put that on Twitter. But, there's so much hysteria that's going on, and we've talked about it to the point where you guys are probably bored of us talking about it. So we're not going to stick to the Iran stuff. But 6 months away from building a nuclear bomb, biggest funder of terrorism in the world. What are some other talking points?
Not nice people.
Not nice people. Radical Islamist. Basically, every type of talking point you can throw up in the air is applied to Iran, and specifically the type of talking points that are used to justify some type of military action. And it's just kind of funny because when you really look back at all of this, every single Middle Eastern bad guy has gone through the ringer like this. Some have survived, some have not survived. Like, for example, Assad has survived all of that, but Saddam Hussein...
So far.
Yeah, so far. You're right, so far. But Saddam Hussein did not survive all of that. And it's just so funny because if you just peel this back, and of course you can peel this back to 100 years ago, we were talking about Danny Sherson's article that he wrote, just listing all the false flag type operations and all the false pretexts for going into war, reasons or how things were manipulated. And it's been going on for a long time, but the Iraq War, I really think, takes the cake. I don't know if you agree or not.
No, totally. I mean, it kicked off, the longest spree of wars we've ever had in this country, period. So, yeah.
Well, the reason why I say, first of all, we lived through it. So maybe we would have a totally different perspective if we lived through like Vietnam. But we lived through the Iraq War. We were both 10, 11, 12.
Something like that, yeah.
When 9/11 happened. It happened at a young age for us. And I was in 7th grade. So 7th grade.
I was in 8th grade, yeah.
7th grade is a pretty good age to get propagandized. It was perfect timing to take that brain that's currently going through puberty and then shove propaganda down his throat and kind of get them thinking all wacky and loopy. And it's not just an 11-year-old. There's many people who went through the same thing after 9/11. because it was a very intense moment. I mean, obviously 3,000 people died in September 11th. You and I both. I mean, I lived in Queens when it happened. You lived.
And I was just over the river.
You were just
in New
over
Jersey,
the river. We both know. I mean, do you know any people who passed away 9/11?
Just friends, family members. Nobody directly connected, but
Yeah.
heard the stories for sure.
Me too. So like I had a neighbor who passed away. I had a couple of like parents at my school passed away in 9/11. And also I was talking to my girlfriend's, her whole block lost like 8 people. Something crazy like that. Like 8 people died on her block where they like had block parties and stuff, which is just nuts. However, a lot of people, everyone in New York was somehow knew at least somebody who passed away in 9/11, whether they were a first responder or they were in the building or not. So it was a pretty traumatic experience. Obviously not as bad as dying, but just going through it. And I always found it kind of, I always kind of gravitated towards the right for most of my life, for most of my, my teenage life as well as my adult life. I was always kind of a right-wing person. I prescribed to the political rhetoric of people like Mark Levine, and I guess Ben Shapiro would be like a modern manifestation of that type of political thought. And then eventually I realized that I was like, I don't agree with these guys at all. These guys are nuts. But I think that was really the circumstance that kind of transformed my brain. And if I was older, and this is a lot of guys who I've talked to in the military who are like maybe 4 or 5 years older than us, who are like Danny Sherson's age, who actually said this himself, that they joined the military because of 9/11.
Right. I knew people who joined the military because of that too, yeah.
So a lot of people joined the military. They joined the military after 9/11. And when I was younger, I was in 7th grade, the high school that I ended up going to, the football team, a lot of guys from the football team, who were seniors, they all joined the military. Like a lot of people were, they thought it was their duty to go and get revenge on an attack in America.
Right.
So the fact that the war, the Iraq War, was, I guess, linked on false pretenses, on many lies, is pretty depressing when you really think about it. And I think thinking of that, you should always, when thinking about Iran, you should always kind of remember how the U.S. population was manipulated and lied to into the war in Iraq. And I mean, there is a couple different ways that the U.S. I don't want to say the United States, because that gives the conviction of like the average American citizen, or even like the average person in the American government. What I specifically mean, there are certain parts of the U.S. government that lied and manipulated data and pushed for war, and not like faulty intelligence stuff. Like it was like intentional mistakes. It was intentional. It wasn't a mistake.
Right.
So like when you think of like the big lies in Iraq, like what do you think of?
I mean, I think of the talking points, the big ones, that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction or were working towards building them, and that Iraq was somehow, connected to 9/11, that they did it, or that they were funding, Al Qaeda or whatever the case may be. But those were the two big things that I remember coming out of that period as like the stuff that they were peddling to us. Yeah.
So there's these two. I mean, the way I think of it, of course, there were so many lies, but I think of it in two major lies that were told to the average American to get support for the war. Number one, it was that Saddam had WMDs. That was the main lie. That was the major pretext. That's what Colin Powell was talking about when he went to the UN with cartoon pictures of mobile weapon labs, which is like really
in hindsight is kind of funny.
Which in hindsight is hilarious because he goes to the UN, he's making a speech, he has cartoon pictures of mobile weapon labs, using it as like evidence that Iraq had some type of weapon of mass destruction, just like this shitty cartoon that you can make in Adobe Flash after like a couple of YouTube course classes, almost as shameless as Netanyahu's bomb.
yeah, a little bit.
At the very least,
look at this. This is a bomb.
At the very least, there was like kind of graphs and like little charts on the mobile weapon labs thing with Colin Powell. Netanyahu just had a circle on a bomb and a little timer. That was the fact that he was able to go and talk about that with a straight face is just a testament of how shameless he is, to a point where I almost respect it. I'm almost like, God damn, I could never do that. But there was these two major lies that were told. One that was Saddam, who had WMDs, which was complete horseshit. And then the other one was that Iraq was connected to 9/11, which was also completely horseshit. So both of these two lies were used to garner support for the war in Iraq.
Right, and they were manufactured, too. There was no, like, maybe evidence of that either. Those just lies.
So there was a lot of ways that they manipulated this data, but the ones that I always think of. So the first thing I always think of when I think of Iraq and like the connection with like 9/11 was that immediately after 9/11, there was forces that were trying to link Saddam Hussein with Osama bin Laden. So there was this nationwide campaign right after 9/11 that linked that. So here's what happened, or maybe should we bring this back into like Middle Eastern history in general, or should we just stay in the early 2000s right now, or should we just shift around? I don't know.
I think we should bounce around because you're about to make a good point. I think. So
all right, I'm gonna make a point. I'm gonna make a point, and then let's move around and just talk about some different things and pull up some different weird articles that we've found interesting and compelling. But right after 9/11, there was an article that was written by everyone's favorite neoconservative think tank, or was pushed out by members of this neoconservative think tank called PNAC. It was pushed out by the Weekly Standard, and it was called Why Iraq. It was written by Gary Schmidt, who was just was a notorious neocon. And basically what he wrote was that Mohammed Atta, who was the lead hijacker in 9/11, he met with Iraqi intelligence in Prague right before the attack. Or not right before the attack, but a year earlier. And basically in that article that he wrote, he pushed out that Hussein and bin Laden, they have made an alliance in order to expel the U.S. from the Middle East, and he was alluding that Saddam Hussein gave Al-Qaeda anthrax because there was that anthrax scare right after 9/11.
Right. And they were mailing them.
Yeah, they were sending people on the members, prominent media figures, and letters of anthrax, and people in government, and they were saying that Saddam Hussein gave Mohammed Atta anthrax. Well, it turned out there was two major problems with this. I guess the first problem is that the anthrax that was discovered was traced back to a lab in the United States. That was the first one. Yeah. It wasn't by an Islamist. And the second problem was that Mohammed Atta was never there in the first place, so that meeting never took place. And that it's such a shameless lie because they claimed that they had evidence. They claimed that they had evidence of this picture that this meeting took place between Mohammed Atta and Iraqi intelligence. Of course, they said they had a picture. They didn't have a picture at all, and they really try to push that as like the big connection between 9/11 and Saddam Hussein, which was complete and utter horseshit. And what's speculated, this is speculation on my part, but a lot of people say this is confirmed. I haven't confirmed it myself, so I won't say it's confirmed. I'll just say it's speculated. But, the person that who's allegedly the source is Ahmad Chalabi, who was a guy who was set up to take power right after Saddam, like an exiled Iraqi who was trying to take power in Iraq. So you really have to question these things in a contemporary setting when you hear these stories about Iran, because of course history repeats itself. And that's just one minor thing. This guy Ahmad Chalabi, if you trace his history back, he had a lot of connections with like prominent neoconservatives. So, have you ever read like any PNAC articles or anything from the Weekly Standard or any articles written by Billy Crystal or Gary Schmidt or Robert Kagan?
I tend to stay away from those.
You have to read them because they're just so insane. They're goofy to a point. They're goofy and crazy. And if you guys don't know, like what PNAC is, it stands for the Project of a New American Century. It's like it was this think tank that was founded by Bill Kristol, who oddly, which is funny enough, is going to be debating Scott Horton next year in a Soho forum.
Interesting.
Which I can't believe it's going to happen. Like I am, if that happens, if Scott Horton actually debates Bill Kristol,
he will.
I don't understand. Like after all these years and after we've discovered so much information, like he must be completely shameless or just so arrogant that he's going to go debate somebody who not only is like a very strong anti-war advocate, a leading one, but one who really knows his shit as well.
Yeah.
So this guy is going to get. I can't even picture it because it's going to be like Scott Horton is going to be shitting on him, and like the only thing I can imagine is Bill Kristol is going to just say American military might, American military and democracy and safe for democracy and safe. Like I can't fathom. Like I don't know what to predict. I almost rather hear Scott Horton debate somebody who's like more relevant, because most people don't know who the fuck Bill Kristol is anymore. Like most young people, like they don't know anything that Bill Kristol was involved in. They think that Bill Kristol is the comedian, Yeah. That's true. Spelling. I'm sure people who are listening to this right now probably think that Bill Kristol it's the guy from Caddyshack.
Yeah,
but
you'd be forgiven for that.
Yeah, you'd be forgiven. I thought that too when I first heard of Bill Kristol. When I first heard of Bill Kristol, I was like, why is Bill Kristol? Why is he... No, not Caddyshack. I'm thinking of Bill Murray. What was Bill Kristol in? The actor. City Slickers.
Yeah.
City Slick. Not the guy from City Slickers. Why is the guy from City Slickers, like, on Twitter? Yeah.
Peddling war propaganda.
Peddling war propaganda. I love his movies. This is crazy. He just made that movie 61 about the Yankees. Why, Bill? But yeah, Bill Kristol is a founder of PNAC, one of the main neoconservatives. There's a lot of them, and PNAC before is founded in '97. A lot of the articles that they wrote were kind of like laid the foundations for a lot of America's justifications for its future Middle Eastern wars. Let's just put it that way to say it nice. I guess another adjective you could use for the project of a new American century is that they're hyper-nationalist, hyper-militaristic. Will that be another one?
Yeah.
Hyper-nationalist.
Future militaristic, too.
Hyper-nationalistic, just crazy. And if you look back and you read their stuff, from the late 90s, they were advocating regime change for a really long time. So they were advocating, basically they had this website where they had all these foreign policy papers, and they wrote things like Saddam's impending victory, where if you look up this, like if you're listening, type in Saddam's impending victory. And then when you go to the article, search, control, find, and write Hitler, because he compares Saddam to Hitler 14 times. I counted it. I wrote it down. He compares it 14 times to Hitler. And it's all about how Saddam Hussein's the new Hitler. And he keeps on saying that the lid is about to be blown off. And he's complaining about the UN and how they're about to let the lid off, like the lid, and he's Hitler. Like, that's all it is. He just keeps on writing how Saddam Hussein has WMDs and the world is going to be destroyed because the UN is a bunch of babies and the American military might need to come in and destroy Saddam, or we're all toast forever. So it's just like it's just like a piece that you would probably read maybe in the National Interest. I mean, the National Interest isn't the Weekly Standard. I won't make that comparison. Like, they do have a diversity of writers there. So I wouldn't say like they mimic that. But you know, you'll find that stuff about Iran that's just like total horseshit propaganda. So like PNAC would just write a bunch of just crazy stuff. Another article they wrote was called "How to Attack Iraq," and basically, if I have it up right now, its key point was that Saddam Hussein was 6 months away from building a nuclear weapon, and they quote CIA Director George Tenet, saying that. I'll just read it directly. Like, CIA Director George Tenet said last January that Iraq already had the technological expertise to produce biological weapons in a matter of weeks. And according to former UN weapons inspector Scott Ritter, and Scott Ritter is one of the biggest critics of the Iraq War that you're going to find, or was one of the biggest critics of the Iraq War. At the time, he was actually more in line with while he was a weapons inspector, but he was the person who was like, all right, yeah, they're lying about a lot of their weapons, but these sanctions are really terrible and there is no reason to go to war. Like, yeah, there's like 5% of their weapons that we can't account for. This and we're about to fill in the gaps. Why are we pushing for regime change? However, they use Scott Ritter, the 6 months away the tool, that the same exact tool that they use in Iran, which is always kind of funny because they always use 6 months away.
It's a nice number, and it's not too long, but it's also not too short. You know, you got to do something about it now. You know. Well,
somebody said, I forgot who said this, but they said that a country was 10 months away from building a nuclear weapons program. Mm-hmm. If you understand the ridiculous, to understand how ridiculous that is, compare it to yourself. We're 10 months away, 10 years, excuse me. Did I say 10 months? 10 years away from building a nuclear weapons program. We are 10 years away from building a nuclear weapons program, because that's how long it takes to build a nuclear weapons program.
Right. Anybody is, yeah. Or any country.
So anyone is 10 months away, or 10 years away. I keep on saying 10 months. So in 98, they wrote a letter to Bill Clinton, basically, and all the members of PNAC signed it. So the whole bunch. So Richard Pearl, Paul Wolfowitz, Douglas Feith, Bill Kristol, Robert Kagan, Elliot Abrams, the main neoconservatives that you think about when you think of the term neocon. They wrote a letter urging Bill Clinton to remove Saddam from power, and one of their key things that they were talking about, what they wanted to remove Saddam, and they wanted to insert Ahmad Chalabi. So
right.
It was like, oh, and that's the guy,
and
that's the guy who is your source for anthrax that Mohammed Atta met with Iraqi intelligence.
I mean, he had a vested interest in making sure that there was whatever evidence to get, Hussein out of power,
Well, the problem was that so these guys were kind of fringe lunatics. Like a lot of these guys were in government. Like Elliot Abrams was deeply connected with Iran-Contra. I mean, people got arrested and convicted for Iran-Contra. And what Iran-Contra is when the U.S. was publicly was secretly selling weapons to Iran when they weren't supposed to during the Iran-Iraq War. Mm-hmm. So they had criminals. So I mean, these guys were criminals. And George H.W. Bush kind of he was a CIA director, and I think he quoted them as, he called them the crazies in the basement. And it wasn't really until the late 90s, it wasn't until George Bush became president
that they were freed from the basement.
well, they started and they took positions of power after that. So these neoconservatives, basically, they created an office within the Pentagon called the Office of Special Plans, where they had oversight on a lot of the intelligence that was coming in regarding Iraq. And they were cherry picking intelligence and, feeding it out to the mainstream media. So they were just taking the same propaganda that they were writing prior to 9/11, and then they were feeding it out to like the New York Times, where they would go ahead and just repeat the claims. So one of the big talking points that Judith Miller, for example, was like one of the big writers who was a quote unquote nuclear weapons expert or a nuclear safety expert or whatever she called herself.
Whatever that
she
means.
She went to jail for being a fraudster.
Right.
So she would constantly write about how Saddam Hussein had biological weapons laboratories that were hidden beneath beneath hospitals and inside the presidential palace. And that ended up being a direct. It was basically copying an article that was wrote from PNAC that was like 4 years prior to her for releasing
not only
that.
was she lying, but she was plagiarizing.
So
too.
no, they were feeding. No, she was sourcing them. She wasn't plagiarizing them. She sourced. I'm pretty sure she sourced Paul Wolfowitz as a source of where she got that information. So they were kind of putting out like their own propaganda from the 90s. And inserting that into the mainstream media to get people excited for war or to make that erroneous connection.
Hits, right?
Yeah, to make that erroneous connection. So there was all these these bullshit lies. That the whole thing about Muhammad Atta, like that was picked up by William Safire from the New York Times as well. So it was just a lot of bullshit that went on. And what's really interesting is that, first of all, none of these people got in trouble, but
except for Judith Miller.
None of these people really got in for ever in trouble. And when you look into like PNAC and the project when you look into this organization and you read the things that they published,
are they still around? These guys?
No. It's 2000. They haven't been around since 2006. But they've manifested themselves in other ways and into like different. Now they're leftist. Now they're not leftist, but now they're like liberals. Never Trumpers. Like these neocons aren't like, they don't have any type of political ideology besides power. They don't care about right or left. They're former. If you go back into the neoconservative movement, they're former Trotskyites. Who like found their way under this senator named Henry Jackson, who like mentored them and who considered himself like a tough liberal or a anti-communist liberal, Cold Warrior type. And they kind of built a lot of the foundation. They were mentored by him, and they eventually joined forces with the Cold War movement that was mainly on the right. And they just started writing and writing a lot of crazy shit. Now, one of their weirdest things that they've ever wrote was a piece called "Rebuilding America's Defenses."
Oh yeah, that 90-page fucking monster of a policy paper that you sent me.
Yeah, so I think that everyone should read this. I think it should be mandatory reading. Rebuilding America's Defenses, rad. It was a policy paper that was published I believe in 2000, and it's just straight up weird. It's straight up weird. And if you want to like read one thing to capture like the mindset of these people, I would read Rebuilding America's Defenses. It
has pictures.
It has pictures and graphs, but basically they're advocating a very strong military, to say the least. They're advocating hyper nationalism combined with an incredibly strong defense. And they start going through, I guess, the cases of why the U.S. needs to have an extremely strong military. Do you have that article up or not? So I could.
I do, yeah.
So I'm pulling it up right now as well.
I was super interested in like page 50 onwards, where they talk about like future technologies and like syncing up, like basically laying the case for a like a space command, uniting it. So Space Force, even though I kind of like the idea, they were talking about this in that paper, but they were talking about linking up THAAD to satellites and like stuff that I'm pretty sure we already do. So like their predictions for military tech in the future is pretty spot on, actually.
It's maybe it's spot on, but it is also pretty disturbing. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, they're talking about like this one part that I'm looking at right now, that's kind of discussing characteristics of how the weapons should be, and I believe they're speaking specifically about air capabilities as improved situational awareness and sharing of information, range and endurance of platforms and weapons, precision and miniaturization, speed and stealth, automation and simulation. So like at least half of those things are what the F-35 is, or you can also attribute that to some of our new drones. I mean, these on the military technology portion of it, like they're pretty spot on, and a lot of it is kind of scary. So
what you're talking about is that in this paper, spoiler alert, they write about biological weapons that would be able to kill one race over another.
Mm-hmm.
Just think about that. Who the fuck would publish that? Let me read this. So, future forms of warfare, including biological, or let's just start. I'm going to start from some other interesting points. So they keep on claiming about a Pax Americana, like Pax Romana,
Great American Peace, right?
The Pax Americana. The building of a Pax Americana has become possible because the fall of the Soviet Union gave the United States status as the world's preeminent superpower. Consequently, the U.S. must now work hard, not only to maintain that position, but to spread its military might into geographic areas that are ideologically opposed to its influence, waging multiple simultaneous large-scale wars to subdue countries that may stand in the way of U.S. global preeminence.
Creepy.
It's very strange.
Creepy. It's basically saying, let's go ahead and crush everyone that's opposed to us because they're in our way.
Well,
that's what that
basically it's saying that we can't go soft because the Cold War is over. We need to still justify military spending because at this time, before the Iraq War, military spending was going down during the Clinton years.
Speaking of spending, I got a really good quote for you. This goes right in line with that. So it says, this is one of those pieces that was boldened on page 60. So it says, until the process of transformation is treating as an enduring military mission, worthy of constant allocation of dollars and forces, it will remain stillborn. So they're trying to make the case that we should just continuously dump money and battle into this transformation to the Pax Americana.
Yeah, it's that weird.
Yeah.
Let's take another quote. So, the Cold War was a bipolar world. The 21st century world is, for the moment, at least decidedly unipolar, with America as the world's sole superpower. America's strategic goal used to be containment of the Soviet Union. Today, the task is to preserve an international security environment conducive to American interests and ideals. The military's job during the Cold War was to deter Soviet expansionism. Today's task is to secure and expand the zones of democratic peace to deter the rise of a great new power competitor, defend key regions of Europe, East Asia, and the Middle East, and to preserve American preeminence through the coming transformation of war made possible by new technologies. So it's just The 4 vital missions: Homeland Defense, Large War. What? Some of this stuff I'm shocked. I didn't even read that part. So, Homeland Defense. The U.S. must counteract the effect of the proliferation of ballistic missiles and weapons of mass destruction that may soon allow lesser states to deter the U.S. military action by threatening U.S. allies and the American homeland itself. Of all the new and current missions for the U.S. Armed Forces, this must have priority. Large wars. Second, the U.S. must retain sufficient force able to rapidly deploy and win multiple simultaneous large-scale wars, and also to be able to respond to anticipated conscientious and contingencies in regions where it does not maintain forward-based forces. So being able to control multiple war fronts at once.
Didn't the founding fathers say that we shouldn't have a standing army?
These guys don't really care about the founding fathers, Danny.
Well, I'm just saying. A lot of people who buy into this shit claim to be, for the founding fathers and the original founding principles. This just runs pretty counter to that.
Here's an interesting one. Transform U.S. Armed Forces. Finally, the Pentagon must begin now to exploit the so-called revolution in military affairs, sparked by the introduction of advanced technologies into military systems. This must be regarded as a separate and critical mission worthy of a share of force structure and defense budgets. The failure to provide sufficient forces to execute these 4 missions must result in problems for American strategy, and the failure to prepare for tomorrow's challenges will ensure that the current Pax America comes to an early end. All right, let's just scroll through it, because I found some interesting tidbits. So I love the axis of evil thing that they claim.
Yeah, that one was good.
They wrote out axis of evil. Who else used the axis of evil? Anyone?
Sorry,
going once, going twice? Going once? George Bush.
Go for it.
George Bush called Iraq, Iran, and North Korea the axis of evil.
Yeah, but they weren't aligned with one another.
I know, but they were both mean old dictators. Great enemies. I mean, Saddam Hussein has torture rooms. Iran had a mean old Ayatollah, and Kim Jong-il just straight up fed people to sharks, and had people shot down, or I mean his son still does this. Had people shot to pieces by chain guns and stuff. So 3 bad guys. The axis of evil. The current American peace will be short-lived if the U.S. becomes vulnerable to rogue powers with small and expensive arsenals of ballistic missiles and nuclear warheads or other weapons of mass destruction. We cannot allow North Korea, Iran, Iraq, or similar states to undermine American leadership, intimidate American allies, or threaten the American homeland itself. The blessings of the American peace, purchased as fearful costs a century of effort, should not be so trivially squandered. What are your thoughts?
I mean, what can you even really say about that?
All right, so regime change. American military preeminence will continue to rest in significant part on the ability to maintain sufficient land forces to achieve political goals, such as removing a dangerous and hostile regime when necessary.
I mean, it's basically saying let's do regime change wherever possible, because it's pretty loose about the criteria for whenever possible.
It's very loose about it. Basically, the gist of this entire policy paper is saying that the U.S., in order for the United States to gain status or continue its level of Pax Americana, they have to be in a continuous state of war. That's basically it.
Right. So much for the Pax part of Pax Americana, right?
I know. But they also talk about things like how the U.S. Armed Forces are going to have to be able to dominate really large areas of battle by themselves, just some crazy stuff. You really need to read this entire thing, because we can't read the entire thing because it's 90 pages, and
right.
but like we're just picking out some just weird stuff.
I mean, we can do full episodes on just this policy paper and how crazy it is.
Yeah, we could do.
I certainly love the whole section at the end about future military because, like, you know, when was this written again?
2000.
2000. Yeah, a lot of the shit that they're talking about here is actually playing out right now, is with the military tech specifically. But you know, a lot of the policy of perpetual war and regime change and shit like that is, you know, cyber war, shit like that. All that's actually happening right now, which is, I mean, as batshit crazy as a lot of their, you know, ideas are, they're pretty fucking spot on. And I don't know if it's because they like Nostradamus the shit out of the future, or if, you know, they've, you know, infiltrated into the government and the military industrial complex so much that they're able to just, you know, force their ideas into existence, or some combination of the two. But you know, a lot of this shit, you know, is happening right now, which is scary because if you listen to any of those quotes that we just read off, you know, the ideas behind them are just inherently, I mean, I don't want to say evil, but they sound pretty fucking evil.
They sound like a Roman legionary talking about how they're gonna expand the empire of Rome. Like that's really what it sounds like. This is
just like a flagrant disrespect for like for other nations' sovereignty, flagrant disrespect for, like, you know, I think there's implications for human rights there, you know, just being a dominant force and just crushing everyone and anyone that stands in our way. That's a slippery slope that, you know.
Well, here's the weirdest part of this entire paper. I want to read this just because it's like, when I read this, I can't believe they published this, or like this wasn't, people didn't look at this and like, these guys are fucking crazy. Like how do they have positions of power? So it's under future forms of warfare, including biological. So future soldiers may operate in encapsulated climate-controlled power fighting suits laced with sensors and boasting chameleon-like active camouflage.
Creepy.
What does that sound? It sounds like
sounds like
StarCraft.
The newest dude, it sounds like the newest Call of Duty games,
dude,
that are like future fucking fighting, future warfare.
It sounds exactly like a Call of Duty game. It sounds like an 11-year-old wrote this. Like, oh, dude, let's just get like some guns on like a ship and like we can go in camo mode and like, oh, we could like nuke people from our sniper rifles, and then we have the ability to like transform into other people like that blue thing from X-Men. Like, it's just like the imagination.
Right.
Skin patch pharmaceuticals help regulate fears, focus concentration, and enhance endurance and strength.
Yeah, you know what that sounds like?
Adderall.
That sounds like, well, it's clearly Adderall, but that sounds like the Nazis, straight up. They were, you know, experimenting with, you know, using pharmaceuticals, drugs, frankly, to make super soldiers. You know, people who didn't feel fear. That's why they all got into meth. I mean, like, straight out of that playbook for sure.
It's well, we did a podcast on this. We actually re-released it like a month and a half ago.
With Norman
Miller. Right? But yeah, a lot of German soldiers during World War II were on like Adderall and stuff. And not only Germans were on Adderall, there was American soldiers who were on Adderall too.
And shit.
But I'm just saying, like, that's been around forever. Like, I'm sure a lot of people in the armed forces are taking Adderall. I know a lot of cops take steroids. I can tell you that.
Well, I mean, but the thing about that is that, like, what you read is that that would reduce or mitigate fear. Like, that's some Bane level shit, you know? Like,
that is 100% Bane level stuff. Just, you have power over him? I can't do the Bane voice. I hate it when I try to do an impression and I immediately fail. All right. A display mounted on a soldier's helmet permits a comprehensive view of the battlefield, in effect to look around corners and over hills, and allows the soldier to assess the entire combat information and intelligence system while filtering incoming data to prevent overload. Individual weapons are more lethal, and a soldier's ability to call for highly precise and reliable indirect fires, not only from Army systems but those of other services, allows each individual to have great influence over huge spaces. Under the Land Warrior program, some Army experts envision a squad of 7 soldiers able to dominate an area the size of the Gettysburg battlefield, where in 1863 some 165,000 men fought.
Jesus.
You're talking about like Captain of America right there.
I mean, at this point, like with all this advancement, why do we even have people in there? I'm surprised they didn't just straight up say we need to make T-30, Terminator units, just straight up robots. Like fuck people.
I know, like why even have that?
Why even have people? I mean, they go at length talking about like the use of drones and swarms and shit like that. Why do you even need people at this point? Just take the plunge, man.
Do you watch the show Black Mirror? Wait, I'm gonna read this part first because this is where it actually gets even weirder.
All right.
So, although it may take several decades for the process of transformation to unfold in time, the art of warfare on air, land, and sea will be vastly different than it is today, and combat likely will take place in new dimensions, in space, cyberspace, and perhaps the world of microbes. Air warfare may no longer be fought by pilots manning tactical fighter aircraft sweeping the skies of opposing fighters, but a regime dominated by a long-range, stealthy, unmanned craft. On land, the clash of massive combined armored forces may be replaced by the dashes of much lighter, stealthier, and information-intensive forces augmented by fleets of robots, some small enough to fit in soldiers' pockets. Control of the sea could be largely determined not by fleets of surface combatants and aircraft carriers, but the land and space-based systems forcing navies to maneuver and fight underwater. Space itself will become a theater of war. Space itself will become a theater of war. That is the storyline of Call of Duty, right? Isn't there a space one of it? Space itself will become a theater of war as nations gain access to space capabilities and come to rely on them. Further, the distinction between military and commercial space systems combatants and non-combatants will become blurred. Information systems will become an important focus of attack, particularly for U.S. enemies seeking to short-circuit sophisticated American forces, an advanced form of biological warfare that can target specific genotypes may transform biological warfare from the realm of terror to a politically useful tool. Repeat that in your head. That is insane to write that.
That sounds like ethnic cleansing.
That,
like 21st
by the
century,
definition, is ethnic cleansing. So, an advanced forms of biological warfare that can target specific genotypes may transform biological warfare from the realm of terror to a politically useful tool.
See, this is why we need immigration, legal or illegal, so that we could just make ourselves so genetically ambiguous that they can't use this kind of shit against us.
The fact that they thought of that is just creepy.
Yeah, totally. That's some dark shit. That's a
the verbiage novel of this though is just makes it even more concerning because they're saying. They're imagining like biological warfare where you can basically just target ethnic groups. I guess I don't know how you would even do that. Like I'm not
a geneticist.
Yeah.
Like yeah.
I don't know how you would do that or like
see 23andMe. They're capturing all your genes.
Imagine if you're like, oh, let's just use somebody who's not a protected class so we don't get in trouble for that example. But let's get rid of all the Polish people, and then someone's like, did they drop the bomb? Like ha ha, and then they start to disappear. Like oh no, and then he's like oh. He was 1/8 Polish. He didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah. No. I mean, for our country, for the U.S., I think it'd be difficult to use such a targeted weapon against us because we're, I guess genetically more diverse. But I guess we'd be the ones creating this shit. So you know, sucks for everyone else in the world. That's
If only
crazy.
I looked at 23andMe. That'd be like the last. Everyone disappears, like in Avengers.
Yeah, it's just like fade away. They turn into dust.
Maybe the Avengers, the writers of the Avengers, read this paper, and that's what they based Thanos on.
Even crazier, what if the writers of this paper wrote the script for Avengers? They were like, well, it didn't work in policy. Let's make
It would be a
movie
killer
out of it."
film. What are you talking? I mean, so far, a lot of the events that they've written are playing out. Like
Yeah, as I was saying.
this is their paper based on what they think the next 100 years is going to be in warfare. So I mean, this hasn't really played out yet. However, a lot of the other things that they wrote about removing regimes at will or whenever they really want to, it did take place. It is taking place. I mean, it took place with Saddam Hussein. It took place with Gaddafi. So I mean, that's all happening according to plan. I was talking about Black Mirror before, and the reason why is because Black Mirror is a really good show, and they always have really interesting concepts. They had one episode that goes pretty underrated, and I really enjoyed this one. It's about this guy who joins the military, and it's a futuristic world, and they go around, and basically they're fighting these like monsters. They look like zombies or whatever. They look like these freakish monsters, and their job is to kill these people. And during one of their raids where they're shooting down these monsters, one of them sprays the soldier with this green spray, and after that, the soldier doesn't see monsters anymore. He just sees normal people. So
Weird.
What ends up happening is that the soldiers are implanted with this like filter, this vision filter that makes them see this target ethnic group as monsters, so they have no remorse when they kill them. And that's what happens. Like that
Sounds like some shit that they would do.
That's what this policy paper sounds like. And he's like, he finds this woman and a child, and he's like, oh my God, a woman and a child, I got to get you to safety. And then one of the other soldier who didn't get like red pilled or didn't have the filter destroyed, comes and guns him down. And he's like, what the fuck? Like, what are you doing? So at the end, he like ends up like trying to be a whistleblower, but then they tell them that like if you can't. So he ends up getting another filter. It's a pretty depressing ending, and I just spoiled the ending for people who haven't watched it yet. However, it's really interesting. It sounds like that. It's kind of...
You gotta get me the name of that episode. That sounds cool.
So the name of the... I don't know what the name of the episode is. It's like on season 2 or 3. You'll be able to find it by the screen capture. Just type in the description of what I just said, and you'll find it. However, it's very interesting, and I recommend it. And this paper is creepy as hell. And that last line that I read, I mean, there's a lot of things that are creepy about this. A lot are kind of goofy when you read them out loud, just because it sounds like, a really creative 13-year-old wrote them who plays too much Call of Duty. However, the thing about biological warfare that can target a specific genotype is really weird, because they talk about that transforming as a political tool. And it's just weird to think of that. Like, oh, we can use as a political tool, we can just kill an ethnic group with some type of gas or something, or warhead or whatever.
Right.
Like, that's really weird. That's really
Totally.
weird. And that's the type of mindset that they had.
I mean, to kind of bring this back to what we originally started talking about, to run this back, like the folks that wrote this shit are the brainchild of a lot of these war propagandas, right? So, hopefully we've thoroughly explained to you how batshit crazy some of the people that wrote this shit is, and then you think about, post 9/11, and we think about Iraq War II, and the war in Afghanistan, but specifically Iraq War II, and And it kind of puts it into perspective, I think, a little bit, right? How we were duped and how malicious the intent was.
It puts it in perspective because I don't like, after reading these papers and realizing that the same people who wrote this paper were people who had positions in the Pentagon, in a secret office in the Pentagon, who also had, like, there's so much we're leaving out, by the way. Like, there's obviously, we can't touch everything in like an hour and a half podcast. However, there's so many lies and so much deception to get us into the Iraq war that it's just, you have to remember it, because wars of choice are mostly because of they're caused by deception. So when people are kind of battling the drum for war with Iran, I just want you, the reason why we did this episode is because we wanted people to like get some insight into the type of people who write these policy papers that this aggressive foreign policy comes from. So it's just like that. If you think what the stuff that we read is like normal, like that, then you're pretty weird. You're a weird dude, and I question your morality, and your ability to be transformed by propaganda. If you think that things like biological weapons that kill ethnic groups is something that we should be trying to get our military to achieve, military technology that should be in the budget of our next defense spending bill, right?
Crazy.
So, yeah, those are the crazies, and they're still around. They're not away.
They're just singing a new tune.
Yeah,
that's all.
then
same key, different tune.
And it's going to be great when Scott Horton destroys Bill Kristol, if it happens.
Why do you keep saying that? Why do you think it's not going to happen? I think it's totally going to go down.
I think it's going to... I hope it happens. I just feel like...
I think Kristol
I think
down?
Bill... I guess, you know, he is such a neoconservative nut job that he probably just has no self-awareness that, like, people think that he's a disgrace. Because most people look at Bill Kristol as a disgrace. Like, if you go on to if you listen to Tucker Carlson represents a pretty big portion of the right wing in mainstream politics, at the very least, a pretty big portion. And he shits on these guys all day. So it's a very small percentage. And since these guys most of them are never Trumpers because they think he's not hawkish enough, that a lot of people from the mainstream left, I won't ever say the progressives embrace these guys because they don't, but they're coming after me, Danny.
They hear that you've said too much.
Said too much. We've said very little, to be completely honest. We've kept our gloves on. The never Trumpers, or the people who really, really hate Trump, like, they've embraced some of these crazy neoconservatives, like Max Boot and Billy Kristol. Like, these guys are like sickos, and no one should be embracing them. They should be called the crazies in the basement. I mean, I don't want to praise George Bush the Greater. God, I don't want to call him that again.
The Greater.
George Bush, because George Bush the Lesser is what I like to call George Bush Jr.
Yeah.
W. Yeah, I mean, he called them the crazies in the basement for a reason, because these guys are nuts. It wasn't until George Bush, he was the one who was dumb enough to give these guys real power. And, yeah, it sucks. All right. Should we jump into questions, the Q&A?
Yeah, I think this is a good point to kind of shift.
All right,
around.
because we got some actually awesome questions, so we want to make sure we get to them, and we do appreciate the questions, because it's I think it's a really nice addition to the show. I hope you guys think so as well. To get feedback and to hear what you guys are thinking. No hate mail this time, which was nice.
No hate. I like the last one.
No dick pics, which was nice.
Yeah.
You can't listen to dick pics, unfortunately.
Yeah. You can't.
I'm just taking a sip of water. All right. First one, which is fun. How how did you find and decide on the theme song for your podcast? It is literally the best podcast theme song I've ever heard. Ever. I might be reading that wrong. No, I've ever heard ever. Yeah. Sometimes I play the pod on my Amazon Echo just so I can hear the theme song with some heavy bass.
Hell yeah.
Well, I can tell you where we got that beat from. A young 14-year-old Swedish boy named Schmund Schfinkel von DJ Schnuppenhof. He was the one who was kind enough to do the music. Danny, you could tell them the truth.
Yeah. Actually, I made that. I made the podcast theme song. I've been making music for a number of years. It's, I think, at least partly why Henry tapped me to do this show in the first place, because I had some technical know-how there. At least it's a small part of it. And we had been going back and forth on like a theme song for way before we even started the show. And I think this is fun to talk about because we don't do it anymore. So when we were starting doing Bro History, I wanted to do like a mix between masterpiece theater and like something contemporary. So and you know what? If I edit this show, I'll put it in right now just so you can hear it because I think it's hilarious.
Welcome to brohistory.com.
So, as you just heard, it basically starts off with this like English tune in MIDI. I think it's a Hail Britannia, and this part Henry absolutely hates it. Henry hated it, but I thought it was relevant, and then it just drops.
It's on like the first half of our episode, so it's
it's still there. If you really want to go into the archives, you'll find it. And Henry hated it. But so Henry gave me some direction. He's like, I'd really love to, have like a kind of West Coast, hip hop kind of sound. And so how I put it together was pretty straightforward. Henry gave me some stuff to listen to, and I just I found a really good piano sample, and that's the piano sample that you hear in the beginning, right? And then I just kind of mixed it together with, some really, really heavy 808 sub bass. So if you listen on your headphones and they're not great, I recommend just plug it in, get it on a good system. It's got some rock and bass on it. It was a really fun project to do, and I'm glad people like it.
Yeah, the beat's awesome, man. Ever since you made it, it was definitely, I thought it was the Bro History theme song immediately. And I don't want to ever change that theme song, but I would love to hear more additions to maybe like swap some off, or maybe like do like an intro to the Q&A thing that we have going on right now, like some more music.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
That would be cool. That's just some food for thought, brainstorming.
Yeah, if you guys like that, and you want to hear some more music by Danny, my DJ name, by the way, is Unsure. Then let us know. Let us know what you think would sound cool with the show. Send us some ideas. Send us some links to music that you like or that would sound cool, and happy to play around with it.
All right, let's not let Danny's ego get too big. We got a really cool question. All right, it's really insightful. So, hey guys, first have to say I found you a couple months back when searching for podcasts that could provide history and context to the situation in Iran. This was when Trump called off a retaliatory attack last minute. Love your format. I tell all my friends about you guys when podcasts get discussed. You're doing great work. One thing I've come to love is how much you talk about Yemen, because I was in Sana'a during the Arab Spring with the Marine Fast team. Reinforcing the U.S. Embassy. This was the late 2011, early 2012, excuse me. Technically, I was at the Sheraton Hotel, but State was renting the whole building, so there's that. The reason this is all relevant, a couple weeks before we departed, we were relief in place with a reserve anti-terror unit. The Houthis were one of my many factions vying for power against the central government, but they had no name recognition. It was a weird experience because we had front row seats to watch a civil war. Most of the time, we weren't being shot at, but there were artillery strikes, airstrikes, etc., all around us. The bulk of the fighting was in a neighborhood 1 kilometer away, but the artillery was launched from the opposite side, so we'd hear it fly over and watch it explode. You probably know that Yemen has a lot of guns. It sure the hell does. Number 3 in the world guns per capita. I didn't know that.
Yeah, neither did I. Yeah. That's fucking interesting.
That is really interesting. But Yemen is like, we always talk about this, like Yemen has a shitload of guns that are just left over in stockpiles because the country's literally been in war forever. Like since, way before we were born. So it was quite the shit show. A couple of weeks before we left, early 2012, the Houthis put a digital pamphlet online that was a call to action for all good Muslims to push the Marines out of Yemen. We noticed some folks taking photos of us for the last month or so, and the pamphlet had pictures of us patrolling, smoking on the roof. They claimed we had thousands of Marines at the Sheraton hotel stage to invade. The real number was less than 50. Very flattered we were that imposing, but also very glad they didn't attack us if there were thousands of us. Not even well-timed Blue Chew jokes would have saved us. Are you saying that well-timed Blue Chew jokes, they save the podcast from awkward silences? Blue Chew just got a free sponsorship.
There you go.
There's your free sponsorship, Blue Chew. While there, I became close with a few of the local nationals that provided security with us and followed the news as best I could whenever I'd hear something about Yemen. Then in 2015, Houthis allegedly took weapons from Marines as they evacuated Sana'a. I don't know anyone that was there for that, but can imagine how crazy of a situation that must have been. That is a crazy story and some crazy like that really, really good context. I really appreciate you sending that out. And would love to talk to you more about that experience because that's super cool. It's really interesting your experience with the Houthis, and it's really interesting that you bring up how armed Yemen is, and it's interesting to hear that from a firsthand source. Yemen is fucking armed to the T. Like fucking armed to the T. And that's why I'm so like whenever like people are like, oh, Iran is just arming the Houthis.
They got plenty of their own guns.
Dude, they got plenty of their own guns. So my question, can you do an episode on the history or rise to power of the Houthis? Bonus points if it includes any additional info on confiscating Marine weapons in 2015. Dude, we would love to do an episode on the Houthis. We've done a lot of stuff on the war in Yemen and like super like macro level, very macro level stuff on the Houthis. Like we didn't really go that deep into it. Even David DeCamp were talking about the Houthis a month ago, but we didn't go really deep into it. No one really has done a podcast on the history of the Houthis. However, I do have a book that I'm reading that I'm getting a lot of my information on the history of Yemen with the Italian presence there as well as the British presence in there in the early 20th century. It's called Destroying Yemen. It's by a Swedish author, and I can't pronounce his name off the top of my head. However, just type in Destroying Yemen. I'm reading that right now. And I'm also planning on doing, I'll just give you a spoiler alert. So next week is like a weird anniversary that we're having. It's not really an anniversary, but one of the first topics that we started speaking about on this show was Jamal Khashoggi. It was when we started the show, it was right when Jamal Khashoggi was murdered. And we would just talk about that for a lot of episodes straight, about the speculation and all that. And it led into a lot of conversations about Saudi Arabia. So next episode, since the anniversary of Jamal Khashoggi's death is October 3rd, I believe, we're going to be talking about that and doing some Saudi Arabian history. At least that's what my plan is, and God forbid something crazy in the news doesn't happen. But I think that would be a really good segue into stuff on the Houthis as well for a later episode, that like cycle of episodes that we're doing next. So yeah, definitely. And that's I appreciate you reaching out. That's a super cool. That's super cool context, and
we'd love to pick your brain on that experience too, because I think it'll add a lot of color and context to the situation.
Yeah. So those are the questions. Everyone, you can ask questions or reach out to the show if you email info@brohistory.com. info@brohistory.com. It is a real email. I swear to God, it's a real email. We had another question too, right? Or no? Or we can.
Let's save that one for the next go.
All right. So, info@brohistory for all of your questions, and we're gonna wrap this one up. We're approaching an hour and 20 minutes. Guys, do us a favor, rate and review the podcast if you haven't already. If you're listening on Apple Podcast, we're almost at 200 ratings, so we're trying to hit that 200 mark. It sounds like only a couple of weeks ago we were trying to get to 100, and we were on our hands and knees begging you guys to rate the podcast to get us to 100. But now we're on our hands and knees again, begging you to get us to 200. So that's very much appreciated. It's like one of the things that's really helped the show grow over the time. So really can't tell you how much that means when you guys who are listening on Apple rate it, and everyone else, just share the show with your buddies or support sponsors that we're working with or things like that. That's always a big help to us. All right, Danny, any last words, my good friend, Mr. Music, Mr. Beats,
famous DJ,
Mr. Beats, Beatmaster Danny.
Yeah, no, keep on rocking, guys.
We will see you next week. Peace.